guys, thank you so much for joining me in another video. So as you can tell, based on the title, we are talking today about Celine. We are talking about whether or not Hedi Slimane'S Celine is a commercial success. There were a few articles that were recently published about Celine's financials. Hedi Slimane has hit his 5-year mark at the brand. I read some articles from back in the day. It's interesting to see how when he was brought on to Celine, what LVMH, specifically what Bernard Arnault said he was expecting from Hedi Slimane. And I just want to preface this by saying you should buy what you love, regardless of whether a bag is in style or not. I still wear my old Celine bag. I still love it. People say that's like out of style. People say like the Phoebe Philo old Celine era is out of style. I don't know. Like I just wear what I like. I've also heard the sentiment of people simply saying they want to take a pause. There's a new creative director, wait it out to see whether or not what this creative director comes out with is worth that like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. They want to know whether it is worth the investment into their wardrobe. I was recently thinking about how when we look at a brand like Dior, right? Like everyone knows that Dior handbags don't necessarily hold their value really well. But I remember there was this really nice bag that was released mid-2000s under Raf Simons. Here we have classic brand, a creative director that's been around for like a really long time, has had a lot of commercial success, also like highly revered in the fashion industry. I don't know if you guys remember this, the Diorama bag. It was kind of like a response to the Chanel boy bag, but it was also its own thing. Just a very nice bag. Like a lot of people really like that bag. And it felt like it could be a classic. Like it felt like it could be a house classic for that time. He was only really at the brand for 3.5 years, and then Maria Grazia took over, and then that bag was discontinued. When you just look at that bag now, it does feel very 2015. Obviously, you should buy what you love, but at the same time, a lot of people that buy luxury goods want to know if they're spending X amount of money, how relevant something is going to be. People want to know, is this creative director here to stay, ultimately? So I read this article from the Financial Times. It was posted a few years ago. This was when it was during that like transitional period from Phoebe Philo to Hedi Slimane. Phoebe Philo's Celine was hitting around annually 800 million euro annually. That was like their revenue, at least as she left. And Bernard Arnault specifically stated when Hedi Slimane was hired, he wanted this brand to hit 2 billion annually in 5 years. And that's more than doubling Phoebe Philo's numbers. And it just really does go to show you these brands are corporations. Their commitment is to their shareholders, end of the day. I think we just always have to keep that in mind when it comes to these big corporations, be it LVMH, Kering, etc. When you read the article, the author, Joe Ellison, even questions in 2018 whether it's even possible to do this. While Hedi Slimane has been successful commercially reviving brands, Joe Ellison says this in the article, I'm not sure about the maths. Arnault expects Slimane to double revenues at Celine, which is fair enough when you consider the designer took Saint Laurent from 400 million to 1 billion, but at Saint Laurent he was doing something different. And I think that's kind of the key point. When you just read a lot of articles at the time, a lot of journalists were like, why? This doesn't make sense, LVMH. It wasn't like he was reviving a brand that was kind of bland. And while a lot of hate was directed towards Hedi Slimane, like, honestly, guys, this is higher than him. Like, this is LVMH. Like, this is Bernard Arnault. This is the people running the corporation. But at the same token, Bernard Arnault is the most successful man in business. He is arguably, at least at this time, like, I don't know, the richest man in the world. And then this Business of Fashion article came out. This was specifically about Hedi Slimane's Celine and how it's been doing. It was posted December 2022. And apparently, according to this article, Hedi Slimane has multiplied the revenue of Celine 2.5 times compared to the Phoebe Philo era. So apparently he's hitting 2.2 billion euros annually, at least in 2022. In my mind, I was like, no way, couldn't believe this. Emotionally, I was like, Phoebe Philo is the definition of the modern woman. She brought something no other brand was really doing. And Phoebe Philo stans are like really just hardcore fans. And with like the recent news about Phoebe Philo coming back, you feel the excitement. There is like a huge audience for this style of luxury, the style of fashion. But I have to say, in the greater sphere of luxury, when you look at the kinds of people that spend luxury money, not just on handbags, but on ready-to-wear, they're spending it on brands like Chanel and Dior. This is kind of, I feel, the domineering aesthetic when it comes to luxury. It's always gonna kind of dominate the market, this very conservative. They love the heritage, they love the classic elements, and honestly, like, I'm a sucker for it too. Like, I do like that stuff too. And while Phoebe Philo did create those like it bags, kind of like weird, very experimental, ready-to-wear pieces, ultimately, some of her stuff was very experimental to a conservative audience. And while I do like that Phoebe Philo does represent that more modern experimental approach to fashion, this is a corporation and Bernard wants this brand to hit 2 billion. So he's going to do it, and if he's going to do it, he's going to find someone that can. And when I read the article, while I could not believe that it was able to be this financially successful, like I couldn't believe that you could double Phoebe Philo, more than double what she produced commercially. When you look at like the moves that this brand made, it totally makes sense. Let's just take a look at the 5 key commercial things that he did at Celine, how he kind of just changed the brand in general. So the first thing he did, he extended the offering. So he offered menswear before Celine was exclusively women's wear. Now, of course, we had people like Kanye West back in the day to more recently Travis Scott wear Phoebe Philo. But I have seen a lot of guys wear Celine and it looks really good. And then another offering that they had, when I experienced this, I was like, oh, okay, I can see why this is successful. And I'm talking about the fragrances. I'm not a fragrance person. I don't really have any expertise on this, but as I like researched Celine fragrances, the realm of fragrances is huge. Sure, people may not necessarily be buying luxury fashion, but a lot of people buy fragrances. The community of fragrance, YouTube at least, is huge. And I think there's just this element of storytelling, kind of this like fantasy marketing to me. You get this very luxurious experience when you go into a Celine boutique and you try the fragrances. And the second thing that Celine did, especially in 2022, made it very successful was prior to that, Celine invested heavily into revamping their boutiques and expanding their boutiques. There have been actually several design articles like talking about the interior designs of these Celine stores, how there's kind of like this reference to Art Deco era perfumeries. It's very neo-Art Deco. Just the aesthetic feels very on brand. As the world is opening up, people don't just want the experience of buying something and having it delivered to their door. They want to go out, they want to feel, they want to touch, they want that luxury experience. They want to go into a beautiful store. They want to see high-end interior design. They don't just want to go into a department store and see a table of handbags. I was recently looking at some Ferragamo bags at Nordstrom and it just felt not very luxurious just because of how the bags were displayed. It was fine, but I did not feel the compulsion to spend. When you go into a Celine boutique because you have a sales associate telling you about the history and like it's a nice experience. And the third thing that they did was, I think they've nailed this aesthetic. I've seen this aesthetic very popular on social media. I see it specifically with like, I would say a lot of younger gals, younger than me for sure. When I see these girls on Instagram and social media do this aesthetic, I'm like, yeah, that's why Celine is popular. And I'm talking about this like neo-Parisian aesthetic. Celine has really nailed this like neo-Parisian aesthetic. It's kind of like this like revamped late 1960s. Think Serge Gainsbourg and like Jane Birkin in Paris, late 60s, early 70s. Think like those like black and white French films. Think Yves Saint Laurent with his like entourage of female muses from this period. He's someone that has been infused with this culture. It just feels very authentic from him. And I think he's just doubling down on Paris being like the pinnacle of fashion, culture, art, philosophy, even just like the use of the Triomphe logo. And I think when I see these gals on Instagram with their Celine bags doing this like neo-Parisian aesthetic, it makes sense. Okay, the fourth point I want to talk about, and honestly, I think this is like a huge driving factor, and I think we're seeing brands on all levels do this, but I think Hedi did this really well very early on. And I'm talking about the use of these K-pop stars, specifically Lisa, but he's always built relationships with musicians. As someone that is just like a huge music lover himself, he's a music photographer. He did this really early on in a way that didn't feel so like product placement-y, but I think he takes reference from these celebrities, their personal style, and makes clothing around that. He's always had like a strong relationship with musicians. And this is honestly one of the most successful ways of marketing. Anecdotally, I remember the moment I thought Chanel was actually like cool to me or like interesting to me. It was a brand that I wanted to aspire to have. And I totally remember this. We all know Chanel is kind of this luxury lady, elegant lady kind of brand. But I remember when I saw this video shared, and it was on Facebook, I'm pretty sure it was on Facebook, I saw the collection where Florence and the Machine was singing for one of these extravagant Chanel shows. And that was the moment where I was like, Chanel is cool. That was like my favorite musician at the time. People feel a real connection with these celebrities. It is what it is. People will say, oh, like it should just be about the clothes. It is also about the marketing. Fashion is the marketing. Should fashion revolve around celebrities? They are kind of the cultural pipeline to a lot of young people. I follow the Celine by Hedi Slimane hashtag, and honestly, you can tell a lot of it is people inspired by K-pop. It's huge. And the final point I want to say is, I just think he has a really strong following. I don't think the Hedi Slimane fans are necessarily as like fanatical as like Phoebe Philo fans or as vocal, but he has a solid base of people that like his aesthetic. Some people just gravitate towards a more slimmer aesthetic. People like a more cleaner, tailored aesthetic than a boxy aesthetic, than a slouchy aesthetic. I think while in the pandemic, he's shown us he can do both. People like Hedi Slimane because they like that slimmer aesthetic. And I just think he does have a really confident, strong design arm. When I look at some of the designs from these like newer creative directors, I feel some of them aren't as bold as they could be, and maybe it's just a lack of experience, but people have even said like they wanted something more from the latest Ferragamo collection. When I look at Matthew Blazy, I just feel I want something that is signature to that designer, and I'm just not seeing it. Whereas people either love or hate this about Hedi Slimane, but he does have like a really strong, defined aesthetic that people either gravitate towards to or they don't. So in conclusion, sometimes you guys will ask me, should I buy this? And honestly, I almost feel like I'm giving you financial advice with like the prices of some of these things. But I will say this, I do think you at least have another 5 years with Hedi Slimane at Celine. You just had another collection released. We can expect more from Hedi Slimane at Celine. I don't think he's going away. If you were on the fence about buying like a Celine handbag, go for it. Obviously, buy what you love, buy what is true to your style, wear what is true to you. I'm gonna wear this bag regardless of it being style or not. Like I have like vintage Celine bags. It doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm like taking a huge risk here. At the end of the day, like I don't think a lot of these pieces are very risque. Like it's not very heavy on the trends. If you buy a piece from this brand, I think it's safe beyond his time. That is my video. I would love to know your thoughts on this topic. And are you someone that cares about creative directors? I don't know. I am someone that, while I may not necessarily look at brands like financial history, I do look at like the creative directors and what they're about. I think that's very important to me. I like to know that I am buying a Phoebe Philo piece or I am buying an Hedi Slimane piece. Are you someone that's interested in that? Would love to know your thoughts, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.